Just want to let everyone know that I am recording this, and there will be a recap of it at the conclusion of this. I'll explain that a little bit later on. All right. So if you're coming in, good morning, welcome. We're excited to have you here. If you can, as always, we always ask that you just rename yourself in the Zoom session so we know who you are and what district you're from. The plan is to get you into groups later on and make sure that we have some enriched conversations about restorative practices. So kind of the way to do it, go down to the participants, click on that, and then go to your name, click rename. And if you can, put your name and then the district that you're already in. Looks like a lot of you already have that going on. And yeah, we appreciate it. All right, here's our little check-in for today. I saw this graphic and I was like, yeah, this makes sense. You wouldn't let this happen to your phone, so don't let this happen to you either. We always are charging ourselves, or excuse me, our phone, so make sure that you take care of yourself. But with spring break, for a lot of us, next week, I guess, what are we doing? What's the goal of it besides hopefully rest? Are we doing some things with family, friends, exercising? I guess, what is your go-to during spring break? Because I'm pretty sure there's not going to be a lot of sunshine here in Northeast Ohio. So if you can, just drop it in the chat. This kind of gives us a little conversational piece to go on. A&D, Cheryl. Hey, Cheryl. Good morning. Cruz, hey. That's awesome. Oh, dance class. All right. These are all nice stuff. Anyone got a good book that they're reading right now? I saw a couple people respond with C. Amy got a good book?
I have one waiting to read, but I haven't started it yet because I was
Uh,
warned that it will be a tearjerker, so and that I wouldn't be able to put it down. So I am waiting to have some time where I won't be
gotcha.
sobbing in front of everybody.
Sure. I hear you. That's awesome. No ease. Yeah. Yeah. I love to cook, so I'm sure I'm going to be doing something. Hopefully the weather's somewhat nice so I can bust out the grill. But yeah, a little spring cleaning too. I forgot to add it in there. But well, thank you. And I'm glad that everyone is participating in this. Um, again, for today's presentation, you can get it here on this link. It's all hyperlinked. So either you scan it on your phone or you can click that link and it will take you to this presentation. It will be in the presentation mode. I'll also drop it in the chat throughout the presentation. All right. So if this is one of your first sessions joining us, what we end up doing to kind of close the feedback loop for everyone, we like to send a follow-up email. My goal is to typically try and get it to you tomorrow. Sometimes it extends through the weekend, and then sometime next week, I would send a follow-up email regarding kind of what we talked about, the hot topics, and then just trying to give you a summary of the network, along with the video recording that we're doing currently, and then any other pieces of information. We also send the link for the following, so next month's network as well. And if you happen to miss the evaluation piece of this, also provide that. So it's pretty comprehensive. I think it does hold some value with a lot of people, especially if you do miss. As long as you register, you're going to get this follow-up email. So you don't necessarily have to attend the network to get the follow-up, but I think it does help tie everything together in case you had to step out during the network at any point. Because we realize that, yes, it's the Thursday before spring break for most of you all, and things come up. So be on the lookout for that. Additionally, we have our regional PBIS consultants. These are the members. We will have, I think, a lot of them on the call today. So if you see their face, if they're going to be in your breakout group, just know who they are, and I'm sure they'll introduce themselves and they won't be shy. The purpose of the network is always to discuss best practices and then receive technical assistance from any consultant, and then just maximize the capacity within the region in regards to implementing PBIS throughout your building or district. So today's agenda, we have some friends from Parma that are going to talk about restorative practices. And this is the way that we have it set up. It's a little different than what we usually do, but we're going to have the Focus TFI review and then go into the district spotlight and then move on to culturally responsive practices. And then we'll just have our breakout session between two different groups. And then we'll get you some updates from the region and from the state. And then we'll conclude our network. So that's the plan today. I hope that everyone has an engaging time here during the next 53 minutes. And with that being said, I'm going to kick it to Leah.
Good morning, everyone. We are going to start with doing a brief review of restorative practices. Restorative practices have many components, so this is definitely a very brief glimpse into the basics of restorative practices. And then we are going to have Allison, the Dean of Students at Pleasant Valley Elementary, talk about their systematic process for restorative practices. So restorative practices defined, humans are hardwired to connect. Just as we need food, shelter, clothing, we also need relationships. All humans thrive and need those relationships in some capacity. So technically, restorative practices is a field in the social sciences that studies how to strengthen relationships between individuals and social connections within the community. The aim of it is to develop that community and manage conflict and tensions through the repairing of harm. So the elephant in the room, there is some negative connotations surrounding restorative practices, and we're hoping today to shine a light on how it can be used appropriately to foster positive classroom and school culture. It can, if utilized with fidelity, it can create a positive learning environment and resolve relational issues. So the purpose of a big takeaway today, a few things, if you're going to take away a few things about restorative practices, the true purpose of restorative practices is to restore and reteach. It does seek to skill build through restitution. It does not replace consequences, which is often perceived for restorative practices, but restorative practices happen in conjunction with consequences. And we're going to talk about IIRP, which is one of the organizations that provides national training for restorative practices, put together this continuum of the different facets of restorative practices. So we're going to talk through some of those. And then Allison's going to talk about their systematic procedures. So on the left side, you can see it goes from informal to more formal practices within the continuums. So starting with the informal, effective statements. The purpose of this is to set boundaries, provide feedback, or teach empathy. Examples of this can be, I feel glad when ... I feel mad when ... I feel sad when. So it's really instilling, using statements to convey feelings regarding a behavior. So I feel sad when you choose to talk poorly about Gina. Using those effective statements. That's a more informal practice of restorative practices. Bumping up just a little bit is effective questions. These are open-ended questions to help elicit emotions and make connections. It allows the individual being questioned space to explore issues in a non-threatening way, to reflect. This can address past, present, or future thoughts and feelings, and it's hopefully used in a proactive manner to positively change behavior, with the intent of responses using to explore harm and how harm impacts others. So examples of some questions: what happened? So us allowing the individual, the student, to share their perspective on what happened. Asking, hey, Gina, who has been affected by what you've done and how are they affected? Allowing that student the opportunity to think about who was affected and how their behaviors impacted them. Another example is, what do you think you need to do to make things right? And that is a big key piece of restorative practices, is the restitution piece of it, making the wrongs right. Moving towards the middle is small impromptu conversations. These encourage people or students to communicate with each other empathetically while actively listening. This is facilitating a conversation. This facilitates opportunities to build relationships and increase social awareness of what's happening. This can proactively be used in an academic or social setting. And this is typically used for like lower level incidents through modeling a healthy approach to conflict resolution. For example, let's say during centers in the classroom, two students are disagreeing on how to use a learning tool. Having a conversation with them and working through that with them together. Maybe touching base with students during recess that are having a minor conflict. They both want to play with the basketball. Talking through that with each other. Well, how can we both play with the basketball, and modeling a healthy model for resolving conflicts. Then we're going to move to circles. So this is where here in a second, Allison's going to speak about their system. Circles can be in part, restorative practice essentially has 80% proactive, 20% reactive. So you can have proactive circles, which Allison's going to talk about that. Like these could be pre-scheduled for different reasons, or you can have the reactive circles too to solve conflict. So I'm not in informal conferencing, we're not going to touch base on that, but we're going to stop at circles, and Allison's going to speak about their program at Pleasant Valley Elementary.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. So we're going to talk a little bit about the restorative circle process that we utilize here at Pleasant Valley Elementary. A lot of times we're focusing on attempting to repair relationships among students. We have adult-led conversations, so students are able to see the modeling of active listening, but also communicating how they might be feeling, which can be a struggle for our little ones, grades K through 4. Sometimes it's hard to say, I don't like that you did this to me, or on the other end of the spectrum, I'm sorry, I did not mean to do this, I apologize. So these are some of the things that we focus on when we have those restorative circles. At the beginning of the school year, we survey our staff to see if they're willing to assist with some of these interventions. I have to say, and I say this every time, we would not be successful without the support of our staff. We always have an abundance of people who are willing to step in and support in multiple ways, and circles are definitely one of those ways that we are supported. So our teachers are compensated for leading those restorative circles, and there are multiple ways that they can request. So teachers have the Google form that they can fill out. That Google form kicks to myself and Mr. Klute. And then we have kind of an email chain put together of all of the staff. Staff can agree to take the circle. And then based on the information that is input, we ask the teacher to kind of put some notes in about what they're seeing and what relationship needs to be repaired. The teacher can then sit down with those students and work with them. On the other hand of things, we might see some discipline come through in the office. We might hear from both parties and say, I think the most beneficial thing to do would be to repair that relationship and start with a circle. So we as administrators might be the ones to request those as well. We do ask that if a teacher is requesting the circle, that they do make contact with the families prior to requesting, and also that they have tried themselves to also make that reparation of relationship. So again, teacher makes that request. We send the information out to the staff members, and then the teacher who agrees to host that circle can access the information about the circle. The nice thing is we put everything in a Google Sheet, so after the teacher hosts the circle, they can write in some follow-up notes that the teacher who requested can access. That way everybody is kind of filled in on what came of the discussion. And then one thing that we did add this year as well is 1 to 2 weeks after the initial circle, we're having those adults host a second follow-up. We want to check in. We want to make sure that we're making progress or continuing to maintain whatever the conversation was in the first restorative circle. So sometimes we have students who need more than one, and that's okay. But we have that same familiar face who's going to be able to meet with them and build that relationship. And I also included in that slide where it says teachers typically follow this process. If you click on that, our staff kind of came up with this process for how to lead their circles so that they have some kind of common practices. So although not everybody's conversation is going to look the same, they kind of have that same process in line. And then benefits and purposes of the circles, allowing those opportunities for adult modeling of communication skills. So important. And we do utilize a second step curriculum here in Parma as well. So hearing some of that common language in the classroom and in these restorative circles is always really helpful for our students. It gives them a safe space to express their feelings and to feel heard. And a lot of times, you really see a lot of progress among students that you might not see if they try to solve things peer to peer. So something that they might not be able to communicate without an adult, they can say with the adult in the room. And really, a lot of times I see new friendships come from these circles. And then it does promote that peer-to-peer problem solving. And what we really want to make sure of is that it's promoting communication instead of putting our hands on people. And then this is just kind of a sample of what it would look like. Teacher who referred, what the lunch hour is so that we can set up with the staff. We include the students' names, some information of what might have happened between the students, and then any information or notes that the teacher has. So again, especially if parents are involved, you want to be able to provide that feedback and update with how the conversation went, especially if we contacted them for discipline issues. What are we doing to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And I did include copies of our Google form request in the presentation, as well as, like I said, our practices that we utilize here.
Awesome. This is great stuff. And we'll pause here too, and maybe field some questions if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, one
Thank
thing
you.
that comes to mind for me is you talked about you couldn't really do it without the staff, right? This whole process. Can you start more about like how the team, the building came up with this process of utilizing restorative practices and circles to, I mean, were there practices before that were not working and you're like, we got to fix this somehow? Was this brought by a teacher? I guess, can you start with that if you recall?
Yeah, so as administrators, I came to this position 3 years ago, and we were actually trained on restorative circles right before the school year started. And it was something that we felt like, we wanted to bring in right away, especially coming off of those few COVID years where there was just very little student to student interaction. We wanted to make sure that we were working on those communication skills, and this was kind of the way to get things started. So we brought this into our resilient learner team, and being a large building, we've always had 10 to 15 staff members on our resilient learner team. So that's kind of where things stem from. And from there, seeing the students get involved, seeing the adults get involved, that interest has grown over time.
That's great. Thank you for that explanation. Anyone else? You can either drop it in the chat, we can field it from there, or come off mute and ask away.
Hi, I can ask a question. This is Tracy from Maple Heights. Allison, thank you for sharing all of your resources. This is really great. One of the things that I know I've seen over the years, both here in Maple and in previous districts where I've worked, where we've done restorative, is pushback from staff. This isn't enough, like kind of like Leah spoke to that myth, right? Of it not being actually holding people accountable. And, my argument as someone who's trained is, yeah, it's actually more accountable in many ways, but there is still often a lack of understanding from staff, a feeling like this is enough. And so I was just curious if you have had any of that, how you've dealt with that.
We haven't, to be honest. I think, there are some times where you see maybe the same names kind of coming through. And we try to work with those staff members on an individual basis if it's a student in their class or a student that they're working with. But like I said, all of our staff has been wonderful. They've always been on board with what we've wanted to try. And we're very lucky for that. But honestly, I will say 9 times out of 10, when we have these restorative circles and that follow-up, it really is kind of solving the problem And then, like I said, we do work kind of on a one-to-one basis from there, depending on if it might just be one of the students who is kind of continually having issues. And if that's the case, then we work on other tier 2 supports with them, because we do have other things that we offer in the building. And if one thing's not working, we can always look to another.
Thank you.
I have a question. Does the staff go through formal restorative practice training first?
Yeah, so we always do a full staff kind of overview and training at the beginning of the school year, just so that they're aware of what the process is and what students are going to go through. But we do work really closely, like I said, with our resilient learner team and with the people who do volunteer their time to make sure that they have an understanding of the process so that they feel comfortable going through it.
Thank you.
And can I hop in and add that too? Andy, that is something that several of the consultants on the student wellness department are formally trained in restorative practices. So that is something, if your district is needing support for next school year, providing professional development or training, that we can collaborate and work together on that. So I would say that following our meeting today, if that is something that you would have interest in for your district, reach out to us and we can set up a time to talk about that further.
Great, thank you. Mhm.
You're welcome.
If I can add to what Leah said, and also to the question that was asked, I kind of put it in the chat, but that negative perception around restorative practices, usually it's when a staff member feels that they've sent a student to the office or to administration for an issue to be handled, and they felt the issue wasn't properly handled. So whatever staff member made that referral would be a part of that process, should be a part of that restorative circle as well, because evidently that staff member may feel that they too were harmed by whatever took place, whatever the behavior was. So a good thing to do is always make sure you communicate back with the staff member that made the referral about how that was handled. A lot of staff members feel that they send the referral, but then they don't know what happens afterwards. But keeping those lines of communication open with your staff about how things are handled, if it's handled just with the restorative circle, if it's restorative circle in conjunction with an external consequence, communicating back, because then that will help repair the harm with the staff member as well. And then they understand that restorative circles are not being used in place of an external consequence when we're talking about major behaviors. And it will help lighten that negative perception of restorative practices as well. So just keeping those lines of communication open with the staff members that are perhaps harmed by the behavior as well.
And Erica, just to piggyback off that, like I said, our staff, when they put that referral in for the circle, has access to the document, so they know how the conversation went. But anytime we are going to have a circle or any sort of consequence, our teachers are always communicated with in terms of an email, so they're never wondering how a referral is being solved.
And Allison, I think a key piece that you said too, which really provides like reinforcement to the teachers, is that this is a bigger part of your PBIS program, and that if the circle does not work, there are other tier 2 options. So I would imagine that the teachers feel like, okay, this didn't work, but this is how we're going to move forward. So that it's not just well, sorry, it wasn't resolved. It's part of a bigger picture too, to reinforce supports for students.
Right. And like I said, if it's one individual student, it might be, maybe we need to refer them to a Better Friends group, or maybe they need a check-in, check-out so that they have that trusted adult to meet with every day.
Allison, thank you so much for that. I think this says great conversations around it. Some of the things that stick out to me is your feedback loop to the teachers. Being a former building administrator, I think everyone knows, if you had that role before, the communication piece is so important. So everyone knows what is occurring. I felt very oftentimes that teachers were always wondering, like, what was the consequence or what happened? But the fact that you're able to kind of even include them in this process is huge. And then the fact of just within the PBIS framework, we always talk about the way we address behavior And it kind of reminds me of our module 5 when we look at like, hey, how do we teach math? How do we teach English? How do we, teach behavior? And a lot of it's like we reteach, and then it goes to the behavior and it's punish, 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 right? But the idea is that we need to change that to continue to talk about the behavior. So students understand the why and what that purpose is. So I think this restorative approach is very aligned to that framework that we have within our modules. So I'll give space for any last questions. I know Allison is in the building, so I know that she might be running around here soon. So before she jumps off, is there anything else?
Well, thank you for having me. And I do have a kind of a sample copy folder of some of the documents that we use. So I will drop that link for you in the chat before I go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison. We appreciate you. Have a wonderful spring break if you're off next week. All right, so as we're moving forward, I'm going to kick it over to Miki, and she is going to talk about culturally responsive considerations.
Good morning, everyone. Are you able to hear me okay? Okay, great. As I transition into discussing the culturally responsive considerations, I really like the point that you made, Tracy, about not only does the restorative process do away with accountability, if anything, there's an increased level of accountability, given that you've got to reflect on, the student is required to reflect on how their actions impacted the greater community and the impact of their actions, and just what are you going to do to repair harm? Again, it's not just receiving the consequence and going on your merry way, but it in a sense, it is a greater level of accountability. So I really like that point that you made really resonated with me, and I wanted to point that out. So if you've been here before, you know that we always like to show you a correlation between the TFI and the cultural responsive field guide, just to ensure that your implementation of PBIS is both equitable and supportive of diverse cultures. And let's make that connection now. So for today, we're going to highlight the culturally responsive tiered TFI. Did you know that was a thing? Again, the culturally responsive tiered TFI. And as you know, with the traditional TFI, we're using that to rate the fidelity of our PBIS implementation. The culturally responsive TFI modifies the TFI as we know it by embedding culturally responsive practices into the assessment of fidelity. So when using this tool, not only are teams rating the fidelity of their implementation, but they're also reflecting on whether or not their practices are equitable. Why is this important? For obvious reasons. Because it's not enough to evaluate our practices to see if we are indeed doing what we said we would do, but are we taking care of everyone? Are we creating a safe place for all of our students, everyone in our building? We want to make sure that not only we're doing what we said we would do with fidelity, but are we taking care of everyone while we're doing what we said we would do? Thus, the culturally responsive TFI. So for the focus for today will be on discipline policies, 1.6 of the culturally responsive TFI. We're going to highlight that section today, which says we should be emphasizing proactive. And you heard all of this as a common thread throughout the presentation that we just heard from Allison. We are emphasizing proactive, instructive, and restorative approaches to student behavior that are, 1, implemented consistently, and reflect understanding of community values and practice. So how does this look in practice? Well, for one, we're not simply taking a punitive approach to responding to those undesired behaviors that students are exhibiting. Instead, we're proactive. We're acting on the front end by using an instructive approach. We're teaching and we're modeling our expectations, and we're also using a restorative approach. We're guiding students towards seeing how their actions impacted others, but we're also supporting them as they learn from their mistakes and welcoming them back into the fold. And while we're doing all of that, we're obtaining community voice. So how do we obtain that community voice? By soliciting feedback from our stakeholders, reflecting on it, and taking it into consideration when we're planning our next steps. So again, we just wanted to highlight that focus of the culturally responsive TFI, given the theme that our focus today is restorative practices. But a key component of that is you want to make sure that just as we heard during the presentation, that communication loop. Not only do we want to ensure that all of our in-house folks are aware that we're implementing culturally responsive practices and that we're implementing restorative practices, but we also want the community, families and parents to know that we are not just taking that punitive approach to responding to those undesired behaviors, but that we're supporting our students by teaching them what we expect and helping them to learn from those poor choices that they're making to get back on the right track for the sake of improving the overall school culture and climate. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Miki, for that. Any questions regarding that culturally responsive considerations? I think that's very helpful to understand that, yes, when we talk about the community voice, that our schools are not operating in a vacuum.
Right.
And that we have the communities involved. We have to have stakeholder voice and considerations as we move forward through these policies and procedures. Excuse me. So thank you, Miki, for that. So what we're looking to do now, we're a little ahead of schedule, this is rare for us because usually we get bogged down in a lot of the conversations before our discussions, which happens, and that's fine. But this is a great opportunity. We're going to talk about getting into our breakout groups. This is kind of how it's going to look. We're going to allow you to pick a room. I'm going to have the 2 topics here next, and then we have some consultants that will be facilitating those conversations. So what that will look like, if you want to join room A, that's going to talk about what are some ways that you can embed these restorative practices potentially into your existing tier 1 structures. And then room B is going to be more of individuals that have this in place, and then how can you scale it up throughout. It'll be interesting to hear everyone's perspective depending on what building you're in, what setting, and what that may look like. I'm going to give you I'm going to give you a good 12 minutes to have these conversations in these rooms, and then we'll come back, share out, and regroup, and then we'll finish. So welcome back, everyone. I was able to pop in a few of both the rooms, and it was great to hear those conversations. So actually, let me share my screen. And yeah, can we do a quick share out of the rooms? I guess, what were your biggest takeaways, questions, considerations as you're moving forward with this topic?
I'll jump in for breakout room group A. We were looking at school-wide or tier 1 practices. A couple of things to highlight were awesome. There are districts out there that are leading their team meetings with restorative circles. So I think that's a really nice way to build that skill with adult learners before transitioning maybe some of that with the students. We were also talking about, well, how do you kind of get a mindset shift with staff, and how that you can really run into some barriers with that as well. It sounds like the most kind of universally used tier 1 practice right now is that morning circle or circle of whether it be midday, but at some point. So we were kind of teasing that out and seeing what was successful or how you could take that to the next level.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina, for sharing out. Group B.
In room 2, we had some really nice conversations. It was nice because we had elementary represented as well as high school represented. And the discussion was around what's already in place and just kind of how to scale it up. And then there was a lot of talk about kind of really putting a lot of emphasis on that proactive, that 80% proactive, and doing a lot with circles. And so that you have less for the 20% responsive, and just about how to scale it up, how to get increased buy-in. We had a lot of conversation about increasing buy-in, and then making it consistent, how you have some people that are consistently doing circles, others not quite as consistently. We had great conversation. And then I'm going to take a quote from one of the people that was in the room that received this quote from someone in Garfield, and that, the opposite of friend is not enemy, it's just not friend. So helping students to understand that it doesn't have to be friend or enemy, that there is an area in between that is not friend, and learning how to move forward with that and kind of using that with some of the proactive conversations that they're having with students. But we had some great conversations in room B as well.
Awesome. Anyone else want to share out anything, any big takeaways from either group? All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating in that. I think it's always great to hear what other people are doing or strategies of implementation for your building, or your grade band that you're working with. So thank you. So as we move forward, we're going to wrap up. We got 8 minutes left. We're going to do some regional updates and resources again next month. This is our calendar for the network. We're looking at trauma-informed practices. And then we'll wrap up in May talking about next tier readiness. So mark your calendars for that. This slide does have the links to the registration. Once you register, you also see that there is the link to attend the network. So make sure you grab that. Also, we have PBIS recognition hours. We have a couple that are coming up in case you missed the first couple. It's going to be April 11th and the 22nd. We have a pairing of both of them. One is going to be set in the virtual setting. So we can, if you want to jump on a Zoom call like this, we can field your questions. You don't necessarily need to be there for the whole time. If you just have one particular question you want to hear from consultants, give you that feedback, and then you can jump off, or you're more than welcome to come in person. The links are in there as well. And it does help if you register for the virtual session. Additionally, upcoming PD, this is great. Dr. Heidelberg out of Ohio State, great speaker. He's going to talk about enhancing equitable practices in PBIS. He is part of the, I believe, the state network, working with Stephanie Denham and Kara Walter in that regard. Great speaker, has great information. His presentation is going to be on the 25th and 26th. So feel free to register for that. That's a great opportunity for a lot of the districts around here. And then kind of wrapping up for the year, the next couple sessions for PD, we have it here. Also, check out the mental health synopsis flyer for May 6th. And that will be kind of concluding what we have for Save the Dates. Additionally, we were talking about chronic absenteeism last month. We will have a PD in June that we will start marketing as well, talking about how to use data and then some applicable strategies for your clientele. All right. So I believe that this is, so this is the PBIS warehouse. This is where we keep a lot of the regional aspects from other school districts that may be similar to yours. So feel free to explore that as well. And then I'm going to kick it over to Erica for state updates.
So a couple of state updates. First of all, we have some resources related to today's session, restorative practice resources. Many of these come from the Midwest PBIS network. So you can take a look at those and see if any of those will help you in your implementation with RP. And then the next slide, this is Gender Equality Month. So a few websites you can go to for resources for Gender Equality Month. Our next one, it's also Self-Harm Awareness Month. So again, two different resources, one from We Are Teachers, the other one from the Child Guidance Center. So if you're looking for resources for that, that'll help. Mm-hmm. And then we have National Drug and Alcohol Facts Week. That's the week that we're currently in, a couple of resources for that as well. And then we have an interesting session coming up, AI. There's a lot of discussion out there around AI and its use within the classroom, lots of perceptions. So Innovate Ohio has 4 sessions across the state, AI summits they're calling them, and they also have included an AI toolkit. There are 2 that are local, the one in Sandusky on May 9th, but very, very local, here in Independence or at the Holiday Inn on May 23rd. So there's a link to be able to register. And then if you go to that AI toolkit, you'll also be able to get some resources there and some guidance on its use within the classroom, within the school setting. And then March is also March into Literacy Month. So you have several resources there provided by OLAC for literacy. And then April, just kind of putting on your radar that April is Autism Awareness Month. So next month, we'll have some resources for Autism Awareness Month. And now we're adding just a new session to our agenda, monthly PBIS reminders. So I'm going to kick that over to Christina, and then I'll come back and we'll wrap up the end of our session. So go ahead, Christina.
All right, so in the recognition cycle, I hope it might not feel like it, but we are technically in springtime. So make sure right now you are getting those required assessments completed. Speaking of the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, the TFI, and the Self-Assessment Survey, the SAS. Those are the two big ones to put on your radar and be actively working towards getting complete and wrapped up. Questions, comments about those, we could help you. I'd recommend reaching out to either your coach within the district or coordinator. We can either maybe hook you up with PBIS apps, which does a nice job of aggregating the data in real time and generating those reports. Also highly recommend attending those in-person or virtual office hours available, and just reaching out using all the different tools to help support your recognition efforts. It seems like a big lift. We're here to help.
Thank you, Christina. So wrapping it up, our next session will be held April 25th, and the focus is on trauma-informed practices. The registration link is right there on the slide. And then we want to thank you so much for joining us today. We were able to get it in within an hour, so that's wonderful. Your feedback does matter to us, so please feel free to click on that link and give us your feedback. We definitely take a look at it, and we're always looking to improve our coaching network and make sure it's meeting the needs of the region. Any questions for the good of the order? Any questions about anything from today? Comments about anything today? Feel free to come off mute or type in the chat. And if not, we thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in April. Have a good Thursday and enjoy your spring break. For those headed on spring break, enjoy your spring break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.